This real side experience would open up with the scene of what appeared to be a multi-layered structure of some kind. Its size was incalculable, and not only that, but I had the impression that it spanned multi-dimensionally. That it represented, therefore, creation would be a safe assumption. Very often on the real side have I had experiences where I am in a large multi-layered buildings where this is indeed the representation, the layers representing the life levels, etc. And although we may all have our own unique real side symbology in regards to the simulator, for me, creation is represented in this manner, as these large leveled buildings, which generally are presented as car parks. The parked cars that feature on each level I construe as representing the multi-dimensional vehicles, body forms of individuals in the simulator. I would be positioned somewhat above this vast structure, as though sat upon the very top and gazing from this position downwards. For the roof, as it were, would be transparent, and affording a view then of the immediate level below. And although from this position the simulated view alone would be more limited, the real awareness overview and impression were of the sheer scale of the structure and its multi-dimensional nature. We may well consider then that I would be standing in my real awareness position, a reality that, although animates through all consciousness, as it effects into all that is simulated according to consciousness design, including then the structure of the life levels of creation, it is a true reality that is aside from the simulators, literally speaking, represented here perhaps with my positioned as I was, not featuring within the structure but atop of it, and appearing in from this real awareness position. To be within the structure, if indeed it was creationally representing as it seemed to be, I would have to shift my awareness positioning, that I would be viewing through the vehicles that I have that feature on each life level, or viewing through whichever idea effecting vehicles that allow my direct engaging with the simulation and the participants I wish to be involving myself with. For yes, we can retain this real awareness aside from creation view, and the personal self be shown anything of what's transpiring within the simulators, but oftentimes if we intend to impact creational happenings, or share these references at the personal self-awareness level, we need to be operating within creation as opposed to viewing it absent of interjection into its affairs and those of the participants. And now, as I maintained this position and view, as I was able to perceive through the translucent roof of the structure to the level below, I would witness a number of individuals, and interestingly, they also could see me, as a multi-dimensional creation, literally stacking the life levels, so the level immediately below the top of the structure would be then the ethereal. And although every being will have the ethereal vehicle, it is the most underutilized. certainly the most neglected vehicle, as most will have their focus predominantly with the physical body and level and the emotional sensation body and astral life level, or maybe the mind levels and vehicles at a push, that the beings in what I construed as the ethereal were able to perceive me as I operated in a position aside from creation, the real awareness, suggested they had the recognition to do so, to be able to shift their awareness to their real awareness true positions also, even as they operated on the ethereal. As most, even those that may have awareness more so ethereal level based, will be oblivious of their real awareness and the true reality that resides aside from all that is simulated, and may well be represented as them unable then to perceive me in this situation, as they would be unaware of the position I was operating from, shutting themselves off from it consequently, even though it would be what they in reality actually are, real awareness beings of light. So, aware beings to be sure, but my impressions suggested they were resigned to a creation as things stood with them, a situation of their own devising and choice, as creational positioning, and indeed universal positioning and is recognition, falls upon each individual to decide and set an intent for. Further impressions revealed the presence of all the other beings that featured throughout the multi-levels of this creational representing mega-structure, and practically all of them were at that moment bound to the simulator through a virtue of ideas still clung to and emotionally attached with. All, as you might expect, but for the further impressions that the simulator in this experience seemed to be somewhat lacking of the usual volume and multitudes of beings, as though the numbers had been thinned somewhat. And for those that I observed operating in the ethereal, those that could perceive me also, they harboured a kind of a panic or desperation, and as I watched, so the level they were operating on wouldn't exactly fragment as can be presented on the real side as verification of simulator deterioration, but more so reposition itself as though being restructured, and this rather had the individuals disorientated, as though throwing them from their established equilibrium. For naturally, with the consciousness being as routined as it is, which effects then routine of simulator design, a sudden shift or alteration would be somewhat unbalancing to those who seek to maintain such unchanging circumstances for themselves. My impressions were that this was occurring throughout multi-dimensional creation, that as the simulator and its multi-layered design is effected from overall consciousness, that some factor had come into play that had exacted a very drastic change to the overall construct of the simulator from the physical to the ethereal, and had every simulator inserted being in a state of disarray. Not only that, but as I mentioned, that the simulator was curiously lacking of beings, and it wasn't that there had been, say, a situation where suddenly vast numbers had recognized the ears and afforded for themselves creational extraction, but something else that presented as though absence of individuals as impressions suggested. And so my view would switch, and an option for real side experiences is that we can in actuality view what's occurring creationally through the eyes of those participating in the situations we are witnessing. For as I said, in reality, we are this real awareness everything that is through all consciousness, and so we are simply viewing through the apparatus, the vehicles of whomever is featuring within the experience of that which we are to be shown. We could view such from the real awareness aside from creation position in much the same way as though selecting a particular idea from all that are present in consciousness, as though choosing a particular movie, but then to be experiencing through the consciousness of another, we will also experience the emotions they had decided to generate in relation to what is transpiring. We experience their fears, emotions, mental considerations, etc. And if we happen to be disconnected from the real awareness at the time, which can happen, then for the duration of the experience, the individuals we are experiencing the situations through, we will think that they are who we are, which adds to the intensity, as opposed to doing so, but maintaining the real awareness indifferent to a creation standing where we recognize that the consciousness of the individual, or indeed our or any consciousness, isn't what we actually are, but something created. With such experiences then, which are full immersion through the consciousness of other participants, with a disconnection from real awareness, will the intensity of it through the emotions we experience and think at the time are real, make the experience more memorable, as a means then to aid recollection on waking. But additionally, we have further objective views we can consider on waking other than our own created thoughts and emotions, all as an aid to his recognition through the comparison that all created ideas, ours or others, provide. And so, my disconnected from real awareness and insertion through the consciousness effected vehicle view of various participants would afford me the experience of the overall panic and fear that was prevalent throughout multi-dimensional creation at that moment, and I could piece together what was transpiring, at least visually, and at a later moment where my real awareness standing was re-established, so would impressions fill in the blanks that the simulation itself wasn't revealing. For on every level of the simulator, physical to ethereal, there seemed to be a kind of revolving technological platform that featured. It reminded me a little of a sports arena, the players on the ground with the various advertisements being presented on screens that border the stadium, which are placed high up on the enclosed walls and are constantly circulating, etc. Only in this case, this revolving platform, positioned in a way that overlooked then each life level, was of an extreme level of technology, in a way I can't really describe, but that also boasted curious markings, reminding me a little of hieroglyphs, but as impressions would suggest later, of an alien language, but a language that had been created recently, as opposed to one that has been utilized for a species for whatever durations of time it has been. In a way, a creational shake-up could be beneficial if it fragments routine and allows then for a focus on something other than the cemented and rigid ideas of consciousness that have been held to for the longest time, and an overall emotion of fear could in actuality be simply the decided, general, emotional predominant response to such an occurrence, which is actually assisting all those in the simulators, especially if made available were the references that pertain to the ears. But this was something different. Something had certainly impacted overall consciousness in such a way that had affected the simulator drastically throughout its multi-dimensional construct, and the sense was that it certainly was not intended to be in any way beneficial. As I observed from the various participant perspectives, it seemed that throughout creation, practically all beings, regardless of body type, were transforming into forms far more monstrous. And not only that, but they were as though fusing together, creating effectively an overall body form or organism, that most body forms were simply becoming as these monsters and merging with this overall mass, but there would be a certain percentage that were not transformed, though far fewer in comparison to those who were. However, they surely were not safe, as this ever-growing single mass organism body form had now the singular objective and inclination to seek out those that hadn't changed and become a part of it and destroy them. The situation reminded me a little of the mutants, a particular expression of a consciousness-affected body form that operated in this way, and that I have chronicled the activities and developments of in previously shared real side experiences. Although, with the mutants, they had the inclination and ability to mass convert all to their kind, whereas in this situation, the vaster majority of body forms had as though spontaneously transformed first as monsters, then become as this overall body form mass, and for those where this hadn't occurred, they were hunted down and killed as opposed to being converted as the mutants were inclined to do. As impressions would later reveal, this wasn't anything mutant body form related, for as I had shared before, that situation had been resolved. The mutant collective was no more, and each of the former mutants, now restored to their original body forms, had been liberated. As I said, something had impacted consciousness in such a drastic way that not only were the life levels altered, but the overall expression of a body form now was becoming as this mass body type. And indeed, whatever the consciousness of each individual body form had been prior to this occurrence was as though absent or displaced in favour of a consciousness now that had this singular objective: destroy all those that hadn't merged with it. And this would explain my earlier impressions of the simulator overall multi-dimensional population being less, for in fact the forms were not absent, they had merged and become this singular organism with a singular shared consciousness. And if and when it had destroyed all those that hadn't transformed and become a part of it, impressions were that it would be somewhat functionless, directionless, and just exist without motivation or purpose, a curious mass that permeated throughout all the life levels. I shared a real side experience years ago where I had the view of a potentiality where before the simulator imploded, the expression of a body form would be this way, would become just a huge mass as opposed to segregated body types as they currently are. Back then, in that experience, the impressions were that as a consciousness continued to impact in on itself, through the overburdening of restricting idea agreements clung to, this would effect not only the final demise of the simulator, but just prior to that, such an overall body form, that of what can only be described as a mass. A little like how Duane once described the experiencing on the real side of the Ekankar members as a pizza dough, their rigid ideas in relation to each other and the idea of Ekankar, with it becoming as distorted as it has, rendering them as though an unconscious, inseparable mass, with a body form effected from a consciousness, with a consciousness overall becoming very convoluted and distorted, which adversely impacts the simulator as effected from it and brings about its demise ultimately, so also will a body form reflect such a consciousness compacted distortion. And at such a simulator's end and final death spiral, it will be expected that the body types reflect this distortion, and with the experience I had and shared years ago, so there would be no expression of individuality of a body form, only this one huge mass, that just was, it just existed, as though having reached such a state of unconsciousness, it was practically dormant, and shortly thereafter the simulator imploded, and that experience ended there. This recent experience, then, would be a verification of this potentiality. I say potentiality, as nothing is set in stone. If agreements in a consciousness change, so must the effected circumstances, body forms, and indeed overall state of the simulator, especially if a greater awareness becomes prevalent. This then would be a possibility, what we might call a future view, and that I was shown this situation again suggests it very much is at the forefront of overall consciousness agreement, but can always be displaced by alternatives, as agreements tend to fluctuate from moment to moment. But this recent experience would reveal aspects absent from the experience years ago, as I only had been shown this mass that all body forms had become, and here was it revealed that some element or factor had been instrumental in bringing about this situation, that of an overall consciousness alteration that had effected the greater percentage of all beings to transform into monsters, then merge together as this huge mass. And additionally, not all body forms had become as these initial monsters, suggesting these were perhaps the individuals in creation that were more aware, were on their awareness processes, but had failed to recognize the years at the moment where this overall situation occurred. Evidently, the vast majority were locked into agreement and immersion with their consciousness that when this impacted alteration to it occurred, they were subject to its effects, that of becoming as this huge multi-dimensional mass organism. But for those who were on a process of releasing the ideas of a consciousness, this would clearly include the ideas that affected for those that did not such a circumstance, and as such, the smaller number of more aware beings evaded such a fate, but however were now being hunted by this mass organism, and as extensive as this body form mass was, it was somewhat difficult to escape from. As I said, the revolving technological platforms boasting the alien and newly constructed language that operated on each level suggested the source of this overall consciousness alteration was technological. And as I continued to observe, each life level was progressively becoming more technological, more mechanized, from the physical to the ethereal, until everything was metallic. The desperate survivors and the overall mass body form were residing within a simulator which would become completely devoid of anything natural. And indeed, would it be determined that the mass body form tended to hunt at specific times or moments, and these were then the established windows where attempted hiding or evading of the mass was prudent, and the survivors, gradually dwindling in numbers, would cower behind whatever mechanical structures afforded them the best concealment when the mass was on the prowl. It became apparent then as to the source of this alteration in simulator circumstances for all, that it was through technology, that this technology had been infused with all consciousness, as this was the decided and agreed to situation, but the technology could also be utilized where it could then manipulate all consciousness it is infused with. The dark forces seek to use such technology for controlling purposes, and with the vast agreement throughout consciousness, not just through humans, but multi-dimensionally, with many, if not most species, then such manipulation via this technology will be effected as reflected circumstances for all in this simulator, that through the technology vast alterations to the overall simulator through virtue of all the agreement throughout overall consciousness, and just like making alterations to files on a computer, can then alterations be made to any file of any consciousness individually, collectively, species-wise, or the overall consciousness that is the simulator affected. In a previous real side experience I shared, that a potential use of this technology was that of utilizing it to simply pull the plug, to bring about the simulator's end in one foul swoop, as though making the necessary overall consciousness adjustments that bring about an immediate simulator implosion, and that in actuality such had indeed happened before with other simulators, where such technology became established and such was decided, the myths and legends of the simulator, destroyer, etc. And here, in this recent real side experience, was the technology being utilized for this overall fate, impacting all body forms adversely in this fashion. And indeed, the alien glyph-like language that was present with each now mechanized life level was a language as created with this technology. The overall scene and view of this potentiality would fade, and now a group and myself were trekking across an inhospitable region of earth. Snow, ice, and mountains predominated, and the impressions were that we were embarking on an objective that had us located in Antarctica. I had no impressions as to the identities of my group, other than they being those on their respective awareness processes. We may well have been accompanied by a guide also. Antarctica certainly is a place of earthly interest. Much mystery and intrigue abounds there. Stories of ancient underground alien bases and pyramids and such, and impressions suggested therein was the possibility of an engaging with the technology via this alien technology that was located there. For this technology is utilized by various aliens. It is by all reckoning very ancient in fact, and only seems new from the human perspective, as it is being introduced and featuring ever more so into human society. The possibility then of utilizing the technology there present in Antarctica, and especially in a light of this current situation that may effect from its usage, and the opportunity to possibly offset the scenario that I have just shared, that of using the technology where massive simulator change and circumstance can be effected through the agreement, where consciousness can be altered overall in any way. So it was rather prudent to attempt this intervention. The experience would end there, and perhaps I may be shown more regarding this at a later moment.
Yeah, a few points here to go over. This is fun. Yes, you're wonderful. Thank you for sharing that and always articulating it a particular way. This is a lot of fun how you do this, like some science fiction program, like One Step Beyond or Outer Limits, how Rod Serling used to talk. Yes, it's great. It's great. It's fun. You are yourself a unique individual. There's an old movie called The Blob in the 50s with Steve McQueen. Very interesting movie. It was very popular in its day. And eventually they figured out how to get rid of the blob. They boxed it up and sent it to, either Antarctica or the North Pole, one of the two, because they figured out that when it was frozen, it couldn't move. And so it's interesting where you're going there. And the last scene in the movie, if you see it, it's in this big box with a parachute, dropped by the military, of course. And that's where the scene ends. But of course, it's not the end, is it? There's always a whole lot more to it. So the real guys, the boys, use these situations, whatever occurs. It's just like watching children and how they play and whatever, and to kind of, in a way, sort them out as to their likes or dislikes, what they're going to do with their life, whatever. And we go through this process here in the physical. And so the guides use these situations, however they're going to occur, because this is why we're in creation, is to create and to experience. And then they will confront these individuals involved. On the real side, the real awareness, they'll confront the real awareness and show them what's going on. And it's like, do you want to keep doing this, or do you want to become more aware? Well, a lot of them are emotionally attached. All that gobbledygook, when you break it down, it's probably a lot of emotional attachments and relationships and all kinds of stuff. But when it's all together, it's one big glob is what it is, just like the consciousness within this physical realm. It's just really, when you look at it, it's one big foggy glob. But when you break it down, you see that it's individuals, got their personal life, their la-la lands, their relationships, their likes, their dislikes, when you break it all down, okay, from that glob. And so they will use this to the advantage to help individuals wake up. And this is our process too, to help others wake up, because all life is awareness. And this is what we promote. And as we promote that only, we are in our own way on our process and tied into with that intent of the isness all life is. And this is where I've spoken many times about all the other little funny things that have been created in creation. Oh, they all look good. All these things, doesn't matter, all the hocus pocuses, but it has nothing to do with life itself. It's all part of this glob, is really what it's part of. And people get stuck in it thinking that it's something that it's not, mainly overall the God idea. And it's not that at all. And so getting that across to people, because they've heard it for lifetimes. They've heard these same scenarios for lifetime after lifetime after lifetime, because in the beginning of each creation bubble, and just like children, Adolf Hitler was a child at one time, and the end result is, look what he got involved in, and look what happened, etc. So people get stuck in it. And just like the Queen of Orion, showing her the option of what to do, well, no, she chose darkness. She wanted to be in darkness. But then there were a lot of the reptilians in that, in the constellation there, on the planets there, where she was, that no, they didn't want that. They wanted to be free, and they wanted more information, and they wanted to, you know, get out of the old vice. And so, but, you know, again, it's all attitude, and it's amazing what our attitudes are as we go through this. So it's easy to, you know, accept this, you know, this body position, this creation. It's very easy, and it's, you know, it's really a challenge to be indifferent to what it actually is. That's really a huge challenge. And yes, I know that. That's why I do what I do, because I see it. I really care to see the wonder of people becoming more aware. And a lot of people say they do, but they really don't. They give others magical hocus pocus or whatever, and that's not going to do it. You know, predictions and, oh, things are going to get better and we're going to do this and that. That's not it. Everything that I'm setting up in the projects and what have you, the humanitarian projects, the end result is to help people go through the process to become more aware, not just to eat better food. That's not the idea, not just to get healthier. Health is not the issue here. I remember when I last saw Paul at one of the meetings, and you know, Paul was overweight because he typed a lot and whatever, that was his body type. But you know, so what? It's not about health, it's about awareness. So if you're fat, thin, or whatever, you're on keto, whatever, it don't matter. You can think all this stuff in your head. It's not about that. You decide how you're going to take care of yourself. You know, we're driving old cars here. We don't have the best cars. But you know what? They work. They get us there and back. And that's the idea. It's all about awareness. And this is what people miss. They're thinking that, oh, well, you got to be spiritual to be a vegetarian and all this stuff. It's all foo-foo. It's about awareness. This is the new now. And the destruction of others is not a concern for those that are wrapped up and most afraid and controlling the planet and what have you, trying to get to them too constantly, as Kevin's experiences goes. But end result is they don't care, because they know that these individuals will come back in new body type, start again, and they'll have them robotized again. So they don't care if they're destroyed or not. They don't care if they destroy the planet. And just like Jeremy's experience of the other day, yeah, it's all being typed in to do atomic weapons and what have you. And so little by little, we're seeing it here. And it's all through agreement. And as I was saying, the fires in Hawaii, and the people are told that, oh, it was a hurricane that started the fires. Well, aren't hurricanes usually like a lot of rain? And maybe there's lightning, but there sure is a lot of rain there. So as the media and the governments are going to throw out funny stuff because they know that all they have to do is get people to agree, and they've agreed to the deception, but they don't see the bigger picture always, and that deception equals the black holes in this realm and creates more blackness and more implosion, that agreement. So it's not that, oh, that's a funny thing they said or whatever, how does that make sense? And it confuses a lot of people too, because they question themselves and they question others and they call authorities, are you sure it's a hurricane? See, again, they create all this distraction. And people have this in their consciousness, but they want some answer, so finally they'll just agree to it. So it doesn't matter who the murderer was out there who killed Kennedy. They'll just agree to anything. They just want some closure, etc. You see, but it's all set up. And it's all deception, and it keeps adding to it, creates this implosion, creates this mass, etc. So again, the real guides use these situations as opportunity, and you have the privilege, Kevin, of seeing this, and you're stepping up and letting others know, because again, they don't. It's a huge real education process to get to people, to get them to wake up. When these extreme disasters come, all of a sudden, the individual, they have a new opportunity to decide something different because their la-la land is disturbed. And so what Kevin is seeing also is that all of a sudden, people are seeing that their little la-la lands are disturbed. And that real awareness is all of a sudden, taking another look at what's really going on in creation instead of just accepting unconsciously. And this is what Paul talked about, ignorance. The soul, we'll just use the soul idea, cannot be hurt or damaged, but it can be ignorant and it can be unaware of what's taking place. That becomes the difference as it operates the five bodies. So this is huge, Kevin. And again, I suggest others start Skypes, do new groups, do things on Facebook, etc. It's your life. You got to prove yourself. And just like Jeremy's experience, you got to prove yourself every moment. Very, very real. There's no just hanging out. It's about what you do. And so there are no excuses. Now that you know, what are you going to do? So I have one more thing here. And the created language, yeah, that's very interesting too. So we have been brought up with this language, as I've said many times and written about for many, many years, the literalized language of the reptilians, which basically on this planet is English. This is reptilian language. And so, yes, when I bring in the new words and phrases and how I articulate, just like Kevin does here in his own way, this bothers people. And that's the idea. That's the idea, is to bother them and to agitate them from their literal mind to where they have to consider something else. And those that do, all of a sudden, voila, they're showing something else. But you can't show them unless they agree to see something different. And so it's a very interesting situation, isn't it? It gets more real. And so this is where each person looks at their own consciousness and what they're relating to and that intent, because that becomes the real you, your intent. That becomes your real awareness, to where you wake up with that intent when you have the right focus and intent, and decide to eventually truly recognize what's real. This is the interesting part. This is just how life is. There's no magic or hocus pocus about it or formula or figuring it out. It is what it is, and it's to be recognized for what it is. I know, it's amazing. I look at my process. I constantly look at my process and use that as a comparison as to what else is unknown, unseen. and then it shows up as I do that because I have the intent to do so. So that's up to each person, and just like in Kevin's experience, a lot of individuals, they didn't care. They wanted to try and hold on to their la la land, hold on to their relationships, hold on to whatever, because they have businesses and whatever. That's when you break it down here into the physical, because you're seeing it on the real side. You're seeing all this business world as a big glob in the other worlds. And so, but when you break down, all of a sudden you're looking at the earth. Oh, there's nice places, there's businesses, people are driving nice cars, they're having good times. But realistically, it's that glob. That's what's real. And eventually that comes to pass. And so again, heads up, it's a warning. Thank you, Kevin. That was terrific. Thank you.
And so, sing the new you song. It is your connection to the true reality, the all is, that the real you, your real awareness, is a part of. New you.